We talked a little bit about this in the pre-show, but would you be able to give us some insight into a child's experience when their parent is in the military? And um, have you noticed patterns when it comes to how our kids engage with this and how
Mm.
they interpret that?
I became a military spouse in 2006, and our daughter was born in 2008, and now our children are 15, 13, 11, and 8. They've lived in so many different houses. They've had to rebuild their lives every time we turn around. And in the beginning, the narrative around this particular experience was to spin it as an adventure. All the spouses that came before us, all the women that were, telling us how they did it, it was a lot of positive thought and a lot of
Mm.
pretending.
Oh,
Pretend everything is okay. Don't cry in front of your children. Don't let them know that you're struggling. You've got to be the strong central piece of the home because, our spouses are always out. And what we're finding 10, 20 years later is that these kids have a lot of frustration, resentment, and grief that they don't know
mm.
how to process
Mm.
because they've never been given the space to process it well.
Mm.
When they would say things like, we don't want to move again, or do we have to go now? And does he have to go again? We would just be like, hey, let's focus on, this, or it's another adventure and it'll be opportunities for us to find new places and do new things. And, looking at the patterns over the last 15 to 20 years, a lot of military children have not learned how to cope well. And we're seeing some
Mm.
pretty concerning and almost staggering statistics, not only in, the anxiety and depression and the things like that, but suicidal ideation and
Mm.
the need for treatment. There's a lot of a dark underbelly in the
Mm.
military culture for kids because they don't have any control over where
Yeah.
they live, when they move, what schools they attend. And it's getting to where they are having a difficult time coping with some of those things. And I say all that to say it's not a bad life,
Hmm.
but there are really bad days. I think that's probably the most accurate way to describe it is
Mhm.
that there's just some really bad days.
Yeah. We talk a lot about in this podcast modeling for your children, especially because we currently have a toddler. And a lot at this age is modeling for them how to work through things, work through emotions, and show emotions. And what kind of correlation do you see in the military spouse needing to also be able to feel those emotions so that their kids can see that they feel them too, and they're not trying to just be strong and whatever, but like, yeah, this is hard for me too, as their spouse or as your mom, it's hard for me too to go through this.
I think the conversations in the last 5 to 7 years have started to get more healthy.
Mm.
I
Mm.
know that when I became a military spouse in the early 2000s, it was at the height of, the first waves into Iraq and Afghanistan, and the encouragement, if you can even call it that we received was, you need to lock it up because you're
Mm.
going to distract him. You're going to get him killed. You can't tell him what's happening. You can't
Mm.
share the hard things at home because he's responsible for other people. You've got to get to a place where you can self-sustain. There was a lot of buckle up and pony up, buttercup. You're
Mm.
you're in for a ride, but you're gonna have to deal with it. These women, we learn to be hyper self-sufficient.
Mhm.
We learn to be very, very stern and strong-willed.
Mhm.
But what we're finding specifically for women who are followers of Christ is that they've systematically learned how to harden their own heart,
Mm.
and there's a lot of resentment and a lot of regret
Mm.
Oh.
in women in our space.
Do you think that is helpful for the husband who is, like, maybe he's, like, on active duty? Is that actually helpful for them to, like, for the wife not to say anything and distract, like,
Oh no.
for the husband, does the husband
Mm-mm.
actually want that?
I think in some circumstances there are times that it's not ideal to emotionally unload all over your service member.
Sure.
However, when we look at God's design for marriage, that this
Mm.
particular relationship is supposed to be a mirror of the gospel. It's supposed to be a place of
Yeah.
mutual benefit
Mm.
And it's supposed to be grace and peace for both parties.
Mhm.
When one party is responsible for bearing the weight of all the emotional work,
Mhm.
it creates different challenges that you pay for later. And what I mean by that is you may not have any issues in the moment where you're not, unloading and sharing all the hard things that are happening while they're overseas or TDY or, in and out. But when they come home and
Mhm.
you have built an entire framework that exists separate from them,
Yeah.
Mm.
you pay for it in trying to reintegrate them into a system that was not built with them in mind.
Mm. That's a really good point. Wow.